Sarah was always able to keep the room under control. She didn't simply walk in. She arrived, commanding attention like a queen ascending onto her throne. Everyone admired her, bosses, friends, and strangers. Hell, even I did. But love blinds you. I see it now. That night, everything broke. She was meant to be on a business trip. Chicago, 3 days, important meetings, tight schedules, and terrible hotel coffee. She kissed me goodbye at the airport. Her suitcase rolled behind her. A great portrayal of a dedicated wife pursuing achievement. There is only one problem. The plane never took off first. I didn't think much about it. I saw the news while looking through my phone before going to bed, half drowsy. Severe thunderstorms. All flights are halted. Hassle? Sure, but nothing out of ordinary. I even felt horrible for Sarah, picturing her stuck in a packed terminal, annoyed, exhausted. I considered texting her to check in. Then I paused. If her flight had been canceled, why hadn't she contacted me? Sarah despised delays. If she was stuck, I should have heard her complain about lousy airlines and rescheduling difficulties. But my phone remained silent. A sluggish, creeping discomfort had crept over me. I visited the airline's website, entered her flight number, and canceled. Not delayed, not redirected. Flat out. Never left the ground. I stared at the screen. My pulse was thudding in my ears. There needed to be an explanation. Perhaps she took another flight. Perhaps her supervisor planned something last minute. Maybe. No. Sarah was meticulous. If there was a change, she would have informed me. So, why the silence? I opened our home security app. We had cameras on the front door and the garage, but nothing inside the house. Sarah always claimed it was too intrusive. I scrolled through the footage. My fingers are stiff. 9:45 p.m. Sarah's automobile drove into the driveway. 4:47 p.m. She went out and looked over her shoulder. She wasn't wearing her work pantsuit. She wasn't holding the suitcase. She wore a little red dress. She carried only her handbag. My stomach sank. I watched motionless as she retrieved her keys and snuck inside like a robber, without hesitation. No tiredness during a lengthy business travel. Just be calm. Effortless. She seemed to fit right in. Where the hell had she been? I watched the footage over and over. Each time my thoughts screamed at me, pleading for a rational explanation that didn't make my chest feel like it was crushing in. That's when I overheard it. Car engine. Not Sarah's. Not my. In the background of the video, shortly before she unlocks the door, the headlights blazed along the street. Someone had just dropped her off, and she did not want me to know. I was already waiting when she stepped in. Dad? I sat in the darkness, waiting. My heart wasn't just beating. It slammed at my ribs as if it wanted out. I spotted it as soon as Sarah went inside. Her eyes were filled with panic for a single second. She didn't expect me to be awake. She tried to cover it up quickly, putting on a smile, brushing a hand through her hair as if she had just returned from something other than what I knew she was doing. "Hello, babe," she said, her tone too light and casual. She placed her purse on the counter as if it were just another night. "You are up late." I didn't respond. She swallowed and shifted on her feet. "Is everything okay?" I stood slowly, feeling the gravity of the situation sink into my bones. I had two options. I could act stupid, pretend I hadn't watched the video, and let her lie to my face to see how far she could dig her own grave. Or I could tell her right now that the game was finished. I inhaled sharply through my nose and chose option 2. "How was Chicago?" I inquired, my voice tight. Her posture changed instantly. Her muscles stiffened. Her eyes flashed with something swift and calculated. She paused for less than a second before attempting a giggle. "Oh my God, do not even get me started." She moaned, rolling her shoulders as if she had just returned from a hard business trip. The flights were disastrous. I needed to reschedule twice. I just barely made it back. I stared at her. Liar. She began heading down the corridor, perhaps thinking she could just skip this conversation. I stepped in front of her. She froze. Funny, I replied, tilting my head, because your plane never left the ground. Silence. I watched as the words struck her. Her facial expression alternated between confusion, shock, and something more. Something harmful. What? She inquired, giggling. However, it had become too forceful to hollow. I stepped closer. She returned one. I checked. The storm grounded all flights. You never visited Chicago? Her lips parted, but nothing emerged. She was not prepared for this. She had expected time. It was time to create a web of lies before I even suspected anything. But suddenly she was apprehended. Her jaw clenched. Then the switch flipped. Oh my God. Are you really checking my flights now? She snapped, putting her hands up. Jesus and Adam, what the hell is wrong with you? That is absurd. I felt my nails digging into my palms. There it was, deflection, fury, and the classic. Make him the bad guy. Move! I did not flinch. Who dropped you off? I asked. My voice sounded low, sharp. Sarah blinked. What? I saw it on camera. You didn't get home in an Uber. Someone drove you here. Who was it? For the first time, I noticed genuine terror in her eyes. Just a second. She then scoffed and shook her head. This is ridiculous. She muttered and pushed by me. I cannot believe you are doing this right now. I gripped her wrist gently, but firmly enough to stop her. Do not walk away. She yanked free. Her nostrils flared. You are being paranoid. She was still trying to get out of it, still attempting to gaslight me into believing I was the one losing my wits. But I was not. I turned, grabbed my phone from the counter, and hit play. The security footage, her car pulling onto the street with the headlights on, the red dress, the guilt on her face. Sarah turned pale. Her mouth opened, closed. Reopen it. No words, for the first time since it began. She had nothing to say. And that's when I realized I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I knew. Sarah stood there, frozen. The illumination from my phone screen illuminated her face, displaying every glint of terror she was desperately attempting to conceal. I observed her process. It observed as her mind searched for a way out. She had two choices, confess or lie harder. She opted for the second Adam. She began, her voice quiet now, as if I were a sensitive animal she needed to calm. I could explain. I nearly laughed. Of course, she could do it. I said, explain why you were not in Chicago. Explain why you arrived home in a red dress rather than a business suit. Explain who dropped you off. Sarah swallowed, her gaze darting around as if the walls were closing in. Then she let out a heavy sigh. An annoyed sigh, like I was being dramatic. Okay, she replied, crossing her arms. Do you want the truth? I folded mine. That would be nice. She looked me in the eye and replied, I never left. I blinked. What? She tilted her head. Her face was a skillfully managed blend of frustration and sympathy. I never left for the trip, she explained. I lied about it. My pulse quickened. What? I repeated, but my voice had changed. Harsher. Sarah moaned again, stroking her temples as if I were the one causing her headache. I needed a break, Adam, she said. I needed time apart from you. I stared at her, away from me. My stomach clenched into a tight, scorching knot. She continued, her tone becoming sharper as if she were shifting the blame. You've been really intense recently, checking my flights and monitoring security cameras. Jesus and Adam. It is suffocating. It gripped my jaw. She was doing it again, making this into something it was not. This is not about me verifying what I said. It is about you lying. Where were you? Sarah paused for a second, then sighed, as if I was forcing the words out of her. She mentioned that she was at a motel. I narrowed my eyes alone. Her lips pressed together. Another second of doubt, followed by a nod. Liar. I felt a heated and unpleasant sensation rise in my chest. So you expect me to think you lied about a business trip only to spend 3 days alone in a hotel room? She shrugged, crossed her arms more tightly. Yes, I needed space. I let out a slow breath. My hands were shaking. I was not foolish. I knew this wasn't true. Asterisk, asterisk, and asterisk. But I needed more. I needed her to break. I grabbed my phone again and looked up the camera footage from the next street over, which showed the car that had dropped her off. And then I zoomed in. A man. Dark hair. Beard. Hands are still on the steering wheel, as clear as day. I shifted the screen to Sarah. She flinched for a single second, her expression contorted into absolute terror. And that's when I realized it was him. Sarah's breath caught as soon as she saw the screen. Her face had lost all color, and her gaze shifted between me and the fuzzy image of him. She was aware that she had been captured. For the first time since the beginning, she didn't have a script to follow. "Who is he?" I inquired, my voice unusually calm. Sarah blinked quickly, her throat quivering as she strained to utter words. "I do not know," she mumbled, too fast, too defensive. I let the silence stretch. Let her feel it. Her fingers twitched by her sides, her lips parted and then closed again. She was grasping for a route out and a story that made sense. But there wasn't one. I moved closer. "Try again," I said with a quiet voice. Sarah snapped. "Oh my God, Adam, do you hear yourself? You're acting like a friggin' detective for nothing," she spat, her voice raised. "Do you really think I cheat on you? That I'd what? Simply walk off with some random man for fun?" She gave a dry, bitter laugh and shook her head. I did not react because that laugh, that rage, it was not real. It was desperation. She was stalling. I stared her down. "My heart is beating. I believe," I continued softly, "that you are lying to my face again." Sarah's jaw constricted, her nails dig into her palms. She was losing control, and then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a genuine smile. A harsh, pointy, twisted creature shot shivers down my spine. "Do you truly want to know who he is?" she said, tilting her head. Her voice was gentle and sarcastic now. I clenched my fist. "Yes." Her eyes glittered. "Fine," she said. "He is my pal." A beat of silence and a slow simmering wrath coiled within me. I breathed sharply. "Your friend?" She nodded, her smirk widening. "Yeah. You know, unlike you, other people genuinely listen to what I say. They do not treat me like a prisoner. They must track every second of the day. There it was. The shift. She was finished refusing. Now she was attacking." I threw out a sour laugh and shook my head. "So let me clear this up," I added, taking a step forward. "You lied about the vacation. You slipped behind my back. You arrived home wearing a dress I'd never seen before. You needed to talk to someone." Sarah's sneer faltered for a half-second before she doubled down. "Yes, she snapped because I needed someone who genuinely cares for me. Adam." Her comments landed like a smack. I inhaled gently, forcing myself to remain calm. "Who is he?" "Sarah." She scoffed. "Oh my God, does it really matter?" She refused to mention his name because the moment she did, it became true. I turned, grabbed my phone again, and zoomed in even farther. The image was almost sharp enough for me to see it. I knew him. My stomach sank. I turned back to Sarah. She was already observing me. I am no longer panicked. Waiting. And I realized she wanted me to know. I stared at the screen. My fingers grabbed the phone so firmly that I could feel the plastic groan. The man's face was not very clear, but I recognized the jawline. That beard. That automobile. I knew who the hell he was. Sarah did as well. She noticed the moment the realization hit me because her lips curved into something between laughter and cruelty. "You recognize him, right?" she muttered. I glanced at her with my heart beating in my ears. Say it. She took a leisurely breath, bending her head slightly, and studied me as if she was savoring the moment. Then, in a gentle, taunting tone, she murmured, "Ethan." The world came to a stop. Ethan, my best pal. My chest clenched as the memories flooded in. Beers after work, Sunday football games, road excursions, and trust. Ethan had been in my life for more than a decade. He was the one I could count on to have my back through everything. And now he has my wife. I didn't know I'd taken a step forward until Sarah took a step back, her smirk changing to something apprehensive. "You are lying," I said, barely above a whisper. Sarah gave out a breathless laugh. Am I? Couldn't breathe. Could not think. Ethan. This is the same Ethan that sat at my dinner table. Who made ridiculous remarks about my grilling abilities? Who called me bro as if we were still in college? The same Ethan who told me only last week. Sarah is lucky to have you. You're solid. I clenched my fist so hard, my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to hit something. Break something. Scream. Sarah observed me. Her look is unreadable. Now. Then she shrugged. Look, you were going to find out eventually, she explained, as if we were talking the weather. I returned my glance to her. Are you really acting as if this isn't a huge deal? She sighed and crossed her arms. Adam. Come on. Let's not pretend that our marriage was flawless. You were aware of our concerns. You simply didn't want to confront them. I laughed, but it came out frigid. So what's your excuse? I was not flawless. So you've decided to screw my best friend? She rolled her eyes. Oh, spare me the drama. You believe this is only about Ethan? Adam, here's a news flash. Our marriage ended long before this. Something inside of me cracked. I took another stride forwards. Sarah did not back away this time. She held my gaze, her chin slightly up, tempting me to do something. Say that, I said with clenched teeth. Her lips separated, and then she did. I have been sleeping with Ethan for 6 months. A sharp, piercing silence filled the air, and the exhale was slow. I could feel my own violent and erratic heartbeat in my chest. The wrath was present, searing and twisting, but beneath that, something else was seeping in, something worse. Finality. There was no way to repair this. There's no salvaging it. Sarah was gone. And the worst part? She didn't care. She tilted her head. What happens now? She inquired, her tone sarcastic, even amused. This squeezed my jaw. I was unsure. But one thing was certain. Ethan was about to discover the kind of man I become when I had nothing to lose. Something within me shifted. It was no longer just fury, not only betrayal. It was something colder. I stared at Sarah intently, and for the first time in my life I noticed her. She was a liar, a manipulator, and a lady who had no problem destroying my life while smirking, and Ethan, who I trusted, like a brother. He came next. Sarah was still watching me, waiting for a response. Her lips curved at the edges as if she was amused. She believed she had the upper hand, that I was simply going to stand here startled and broken while she went away, as if none of this was important. I smiled, but not because I felt fine, not because anything in this was humorous, because she had no notion what would happen next. I turned aside, moved to the kitchen counter, and grabbed my phone. Sarah's smirk shifted slightly. "What are you doing now?" she asked, suspicious now. I scrolled through my contacts. Ethan. I pressed the call button. Sarah's eyes widened. Adam. I held out a finger to silence her. The phone rang once or twice. Then Ethan's voice came through, casual and oblivious. "What's up, man?" I did not even hesitate. I know there's silence. Then a little, scarcely noticeable inhale. Sarah flinched. Ethan's voice lowered slightly. "What? What exactly are you talking about? I looked at Sarah. She was now grasping the counter edge, her claws sinking into the surface, her confidence gone. Do not do this, Adam, she spoke quietly. I ignored her. I know everything. I told Ethan. 6 months. You and Sarah. Another lapse in stillness. This time, the duration is longer. I could hear his breathing from the other end. I could practically feel him grasping for an excuse, a way to persuade himself out of it. Finally, he exhaled. Man, I'm not sure what she told you, but it's not like that. I laughed, a genuine, humorless laugh. I turned the phone on speaker and placed it on the counter. Go ahead. I said, tell her that. Sarah's face had lost its color. Ethan. She snapped, her voice shrill, warning him, but he had already detected the tone in my voice. The steel represents finality, and with that, the last of his loyalty was destroyed. Sarah, he murmured. He knows. I watched her mask absolutely fall apart. Her gaze flashed between me and the phone. Her breathing is becoming irregular. She opened her mouth, but I spoke before she did. You weren't about to tell him, were you? I inquired, tilting my head. She swallowed. Adam, please listen. Why would you? I shut her off. You got away with it for 6 months. You probably assumed you could keep doing it. Lie to both of us. Play the naive wife at home. Sarah, the fun girlfriend on the side, snapped. Adam, you don't get to appear innocent in this, she spat. You ignored me for months. You put more effort into your dumb work than you have into this marriage. What was I expected to do? Simply sit here and wait for you to care. I should have been furious, but I was not. I was finished. I shake my head. You could have left, Sarah. You could have told me that you were dissatisfied. Instead, you choose to lie. Cheating. Going behind my back with my best friend. Sarah's lips trembled slightly and her hands tightened into fists. She realized she had lost control of the situation when Ethan spoke again over the telephone. Is he going to go after me? Sarah jerked her head toward the phone. Ethan. Say nothing. I smiled. Slow and chilly. Are you afraid? Ethan asked. Silence. Sarah reached for my phone, but I grabbed her wrist midair. Her eyes flashed with something I had never seen before, fear for the first time. She was learning that I wasn't the weak, miserable husband she had assumed I was. I let her go and grabbed up my phone. Don't worry, I said into the receiver. I am not coming after you. Sarah breathed, slightly relieved. But then I added, not yet. So I hung up. Sarah took a sharp gasp, stepping back. What? What does this mean? I turned to face her completely. My heartbeat was now calm, steady. It means I'm finished talking. I said, and now I am stealing everything from you. Her expression crumbled, and I knew. She finally realized what she'd just lost. Sarah stood there, stunned for the first time since this all began. She wasn't smirking, rolling her eyes, or trying to shift the blame back to me. She was simply silent because she recognized what I had done that she had lost. I saw her arms folded, waiting. Her chest lifted and sank with unsteady breaths. She opened her mouth and then closed it. You do not mean that. She finally spoke, forcing a faint laugh. You are angry. You're not thinking clearly. I did not blink. I've never thought so clearly in my life. Her jaw clenched. She took a step towards me. She held her hands out like if she were approaching a wild animal. Adam. Okay, I get it. You are injured. And maybe I went about things the wrong way. But we can discuss this. Just don't make any rash judgments, okay? I grinned, and then I saw it. She was afraid. Not because she regretted her actions, or because she cared about me, but because she knew what was coming. Sarah had spent 6 months living in a fantasy world, juggling me and Ethan like a twisted game. She never anticipated she'd be caught, and for the first time, she wasn't in control. And that scared her. I moved forward just enough to make her flinch. "Do you think I'm making a reckless decision?" I asked, in a suspiciously calm voice. Sarah gulped. "Yes." I shook my head slowly. "No, Sarah." "You did." I grabbed my phone and went through my contacts again. "Who are you calling?" she asked. Her voice is suddenly unsteady. I didn't respond. I located the number I needed and pressed the dial. Sarah grabbed for the phone, but I quickly avoided her. "Adam, stop!" she snapped. "We do not need to include anyone else in this." I giggled under my breath. "Oh, we sure do." The line clicked and a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Mrs. Lively's reality. This is Pam speaking." Sarah's face turned white. I smiled. "Hello, Pam," I said smoothly. "This is Adam Carter. I need to talk about selling my house urgently." Sarah gave a gasp. "Adam, you're not being serious." She stammered, her eyes ablaze. "You would not do that. This is our home." I met her gaze. My expression was very frigid. "Not anymore." She lost it. "Adam, for God's sake, could you please stop acting like a child for a moment?" she snapped, her voice rising. "We need to talk about this as grown-ups. You can't simply throw everything away because you're angry." I raised an eyebrow. "I am not throwing anything away. You did that when you chose to sleep with my best friend." Sarah's breathing was irregular now, her hands clenched into fists by her sides. "Mr. Carter," Pam's words broke through the tension. "Are you wanting to list your home or simply receive a valuation?" I held Sarah's frantic stare. "List it." Sarah's eyes were filled with wrath. "You're petty." I hung up. Then I grinned. Sarah was fuming. "You think you're really bright, don't you?" she hissed. I shrugged. "I believe I'm done wasting time." She shook her head and laughed quickly and without humor. "What is your plan? Sell the house. Divorce me. What? You think that will hurt me?" I stepped closer and lowered my voice. "No, Sarah, I believe that stealing everything you care about will stop for the first time." "She seems really terrified." Sarah stumbled back. Her lips was slightly open, and her chest rose and fell with harsh, irregular breaths. She'd spent the last 6 months sneaking around, lying and manipulating. She was living in a fantasy world in which she possessed complete power. But now, she was now watching as that fantasy burned to the ground. "Are you serious?" she mumbled, as if she was only now realizing that this was real. I was not going to cry, beg, or allow her to gaslight me into staying. I nodded, dead serious. Her hands had curled into fists. Her gaze darted about the kitchen, looking for a way out, some last-ditch explanation or lie that could fix everything. But there was nothing more to say. She knew it. Then the anger returned. She scoffed, shaking her head, and her lips curled into something unpleasant. "Wow," she mumbled. "You know what? You're pathetic, Adam." I smiled. There it was. When guilt proved ineffective, when weeping and seeming to care proved ineffective, she turned to insults. I leaned against the countertop. "Are you done?" She gave a sour laugh. "Do you honestly think you're a badass? You sell the house and divorce me. You cut me off. Do you think that makes you stronger?" I tilted my head in amusement. "I believe it makes me free." Her nostrils flared. "And where will you go?" she snapped. "You think you can simply walk away and be happy? You have nothing without me, Adam. Nothing." I allowed her comments to rest between us for a time. Allow her to believe for a brief moment that she may still hurt me. Then I gave a low, quiet, almost pitying laugh. "Do you honestly believe that?" I asked, shaking my head. "Do you believe I am like you? Do I need someone to define me, that I would be unable to survive without you?" Sarah's jaw tightened, her confidence waning, and I stepped closer. "You want to know the difference between us, Sarah?" She didn't respond. I leaned in, my voice lowered just enough to get her attention. "I can start over." I said, "I can create something fresh, but you." I smiled. Slow, deliberate. "You basically annihilate everything you touch." Sarah's lips moved slightly for the first time. She had no way back. I could see it occurring in real time. She understood she had done more than simply cheat on me. She had not only betrayed me, she had ruined her own life in the process. However, it was too late now. I straightened, took out my phone, and began typing. Sarah's breath caught. What? What are you doing now? I did not even look up. Texting your mother? Her eyes expanded. You would not. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, she doesn't know? I faked astonishment. What? You didn't inform her you ended your marriage. You didn't tell her you wasted 6 years on a couple inexpensive hotel rooms with my best friend. Sarah's face twisted. It is none of her business, Adam, I smirked. You probably should have kept it a secret. Better. She lunged at my phone, but I was faster. I held it up just out of reach. Sarah let out an angry snarl and shoved me hard in the chest. You're such a freaking child. I scarcely moved. Her insults no longer had any meaning. I pressed send. Sarah gave a gasp. You? She gritted her teeth. Do you think you're hurting me? You think telling my mom will ruin my life? Please, she will get over it. I shrugged. Maybe. Then I grinned. But how about your job? Her entire body stilled. Bingo. Oh, that grabbed your attention, I remarked as I pocketed my phone. What do you think your boss will say if he finds out you fabricated a work trip to sleep with your employee's husband? Sarah's face had lost its color. I moved closer, now towering over her. You did not simply cheat, Sarah. You lied about your work. You stole business funds to support your affair. She staggered back and gripped the counter. You would not dare. I smirked. Pay attention to me. Sarah Carter finally broke. Sarah froze. For the first time tonight. She wasn't grinning or rolling her eyes. She wasn't pretending to still have control. She was trapped. You cannot do that. She stammered, but her confidence and sharp-cutting attitude were gone. I saw it in her eyes. Pure panic. I folded my arms and tilted my head. Oh, I can, I replied calmly, and I will. Sarah shook her head quickly. Adam, stop. This is stupid. You are acting like a child. I laughed. A child, because I refused to roll over and let you walk all over me. Her breathing was unsteady now. This isn't only about us. If you inform my supervisor, I will lose my job, Adam. Do you even understand that? I greeted her wide, horrified eyes. I do. Her mouth opened, closed. I opened it again. She was scrambling and desperate. She had spent 6 months lying, sneaking and hiding her tracks, believing she would never suffer any consequences, and suddenly everything was crumbling. Her voice crackled. Please, I raised an eyebrow. Please. What? She gulped hard. Please, do not do this. She inhaled sharply and shook her head. Okay, I screwed up. I know I did. But you aren't simply punishing me, Adam. You're completely wrecking my life. There it was. She wasn't concerned about what she had done. She didn't care how she had destroyed my life and lied to my face. Made me feel foolish. She just cared that it had finally caught up with her. I moved closer and lowered my voice. Sarah, you damaged your own life. Her lips quivered. I noticed the emotions on her face. Shock, denial, anger, bargaining, then the shift. She inhaled sharply and straightened her back. Her expression stiffened. Her voice lowered to a near whisper. Do you want a war, Adam? I smirked. I want the truth. Her eyes clouded. You are unable to handle the truth. I leaned in slightly. Try me. She clenched her jaw. Fine, she snapped. Do you think Ethan was the only one? The room tilted. Everything around me blurred. My heartbeat is pounding in my ears. I had prepared myself for lies, manipulation, and begging. I did not expect this. I narrowed my eyes. What have you just said? Sarah tilted her head, her lips curving slightly. You have heard me. The way she put it. Casual, smug, as if she intended to twist the knife even farther. I swallowed, wrath bubbling in my chest. Who? She gave a sarcastic shrug. Does it matter? I inhaled slowly, fists clenched. It does to me. Sarah stared at me for a long time. Then she sighed, like this was all so exhausting for her. Then with a slow, purposeful sneer she whispered, sending Nick staggering back. Nick? My co-worker. He sat 2 desks apart from me. The guy who came over for poker night. He shook my hand at my wedding. I let out a slow, shaking breath. You are lying? Sarah licked her lips, eyes shining. Am I? I stood there looking at the woman I once loved. I felt my stomach twist into something black and horrible. She had no shame, no sorrow, and no soul. And I'd given 6 years of my life to her. I breathed sharply. You know what, Sarah? I said in an unusually calm voice. She lifted her eyebrow. I took out my phone, looked up Nick's number, and clicked the call button. Sarah's eyes widened in terror. Adam? No. I put my phone on speaker. Nick responded immediately. Hey, guy, what's up? I smiled. Hi, Nick, I said casually. Sarah just informed me that you two have been banging. Silence, then take a strong inhalation. Sarah grabbed for my phone, but I quickly avoided it. I grinned. Nick wasn't quick enough. I had him just where I wanted him. The quiet on the phone was deafening. Sarah was breathing quickly. Her hands were shaking at her sides. Nick. Frozen. I could almost hear the gears in his head churning and scrambling, desperately looking for an exit. Then he let out a slow, anxious, guilty breath. Adam, guy, listen to me. I cut him off. Don't, Nick. Shut up right away. Sarah's eyes were wide with dread now. She reached for the phone again, but I yanked it away. Adam, please, she snarled between her clamped teeth. I ignored her. I looked at the phone, at the man I had trusted, and grinned cruelly. How long? Nick hesitated. How long? Another lapse in stillness. Then, in a voice so low I almost missed it, he murmured. Nearly a year. The room tilted. My heartbeat slammed into my ears. 1 year? A whole dang year. Longer than Ethan. Longer than I ever imagined possible. And then everything made sense. Those late nights. Sarah was always required to attend unexpected work events and missed calls, where she would return home smelling like cologne. That was not mine. It was never only Ethan. She had been cheating on me for a year with other men, and she had no intention of stopping. Something inside of me cracked. I exhaled slowly, grasping the counter so hard that my knuckles turned white. Sarah was eyeing me closely now, as if I were a live explosive. She seemed unsure of what I was going to do next. I met her gaze. Then I went back to my phone. I laughed, a sharp, bitter, unfunny chuckle. Nick did not say anything. You know what, Nick? I said in an unusually calm voice. He swallowed. What? You and Ethan should go get a drink. I said to compare notes, a sharp breath from the opposite end. Adam, I hung up. Sarah winced as though I had hit her. Adam. I turned against her. Say nothing. She flinched, and for the first time tonight, I noticed dread in her eyes. No fear of being caught. I am not afraid of informing others, fear that if I walk away and never look back, she will lose. And I was done with her game. I grabbed my keys and jacket and walked for the door. Sarah went into a panic. Adam, please wait. I did not. I was already gone. Sarah chased me the moment my hand touched the handle. She reached and grabbed my arm, as if she could physically prevent me from going. Adam, please, just pause for a second, she implored. Her tone was no longer harsh or sarcastic. Now it was fragile, uncertain, and desperate. I slowly turned my head, glancing at her hand wrapped around my arm, then glanced at her. Let go. She swallowed. Her fingers clenched. Not like this, she whispered. Do not walk away like this. I exhaled, steadying myself. I was done yelling, asking questions and searching for answers. I had no need. I met her eyes, which were serene and cold. "You are still acting as if this is a choice," I said calmly, as if I might genuinely remain. Sarah flinched. Her grip weakened. "Good." I released my arm and turned the knob, but before I could step out, she blurted, "You're going to regret this." I froze. Then I laughed, a slow, bitter, true chuckle. I tilted my head slightly so that I could see her in my peripheral vision. "Do you know what's funny?" I asked. She said nothing. I smirked. I was thinking the exact same thing. Then I walked out. I stepped into the cold night air, closing the door behind me, not slamming it, not kicking it, simply closing it, because that was all Sarah was anymore. I would never step through that door again. I inhaled deeply, experiencing a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. I took out my phone, checked my texts, and sent one last message. "Me? I hope it was worth it, both of you." Then, without hesitation, I blocked Sarah. Blocked Ethan. Blocked Nick. I shut them off, just as they had cut me out of my own life. I walked to my car, got in, and sat for a bit. Anger, pain, and betrayal. Everything was still there, but it wasn't controlling me any longer. I turned on the ignition and gripped the wheel. I had lost my wife and dearest friend. I lost the life I believed I had. But I was finally free after a long period, and I was going to make sure that they all regretted it. The engine rumbled under my hands, steady and real. I sat there, grasping the wheel, and stared at the road ahead. I still felt the weight of everything. The betrayal, fury, and falsehoods pile on top of one another like a house of cards. But now, it did not own me. Sarah believed she had control. She thought she could manipulate, gaslight, and break me. But she was mistaken. I started the car and drove away from the house that used to be ours, watching it vanish in my rearview mirror. I had no strategy and no destination. Just move forward. My phone vibrated. I cast a downward glance. Unknown number. "Adam, please talk to me." "Sarah." I smirked, pathetic. She still believed she had a shot, that I'd take up, give her a chance to twist the knife one more time. I deleted the message. Then, as an afterthought, I opened my photo gallery and scrolled through years of images, vacations, anniversaries, and selfies in bed, laughing as if we had never stopped. Everything was made up. I pushed select all, then wiped everything. The moment the photos vanished, so went the final piece of Sarah that had been clinging to me like a parasite. I breathed easier for a long time. I assumed my life was set in stone, that I'd grow old alongside Sarah, that Ethan would be my best buddy until we were both old and gray, and that my world was safe. But it wasn't. And maybe that was a good thing, since it allowed me to construct something better. I wasn't sure where I was headed. I had no idea what followed next. However, as I drove into the darkness, my hold on the wheel relaxed. My chest felt light. I turned up the radio, pulled down the windows, and let the wind blow in. For the first time in a long time, I grinned and did not glance back. Here's the next story. Wife recognized that she had gone too far with her adultery. Cheating has a cost, and the innocent bear the biggest burden. 2 police officers brought a distraught Nancy into the interview room. It was without a window and had a massive 2-way mirror on one side. In the center was a table and 2 chairs facing each other. On the table were a mic and a camera. One officer made her sit facing the mirror. She sat down with tears flowing down her face. The 2 guys exited the room, and a young woman entered, her badge dangling from a neck lanyard. "I'm Detective Lincoln, Sarah Lincoln." She sat opposite Nancy. "I understand that you are going through a difficult time right now, but we need to go over everything up to what happened this morning in the liquor store parking lot. I've already told the 2 officers everything. Detective, it's been already 4 hours that I have been here, and I need to go home to my family." Nancy stopped talking and began crying. The investigator turned around to face the mirror and made a gesture. Immediately, an officer walked into the room with a box of tissues, placed it on the table near Nancy, and left, closing the door behind him. My 13-year-old daughter needs me. I need to go, Nancy pleaded through tears. I absolutely understand, Mrs. Westford, but there was so much screaming and wailing that the two officers didn't comprehend anything. After your call to your parents, they drove to your house, and they are with your daughter. The investigator remarked in a sympathetic voice. I have some questions. We need to comprehend the entire situation. She held Nancy's hand. This isn't an interrogation. Consider it as a conversation between two grown-ups. Two women? Nancy's voice is clear to me. Do you want something to drink, Mrs. Westford? Coffee? Water? No, thank you. I'm good. Please let us continue our conversation. Where should I start? Nancy took a tissue from the box and dried her tears. Let's say I was born Nancy Stewart. On my first day in grade 1, the teacher made me seat close to Steve Westford. He was an extremely attractive boy. He had strange school supplies such as colorful pencils, a pencil with Mickey on top, a butterfly-shaped sharpener, and a scented eraser. We made friends and sat together at lunchtime. In the afternoon, my mother arrived to fetch me up. He went up to us and handed me the pen. Nancy smiled. He astonished Mom with his wonderful act. She later told me that I already had an admirer on my first day of school. Since then, we've always been together and attended all of our lessons together. Of course, we always sat close to one another. The entire school knew we were inseparable. We lost our virginity on the night of our high school graduation. He's always been gentle. What about both of your parents? They knew we had been in love from childhood, and they were fine with it. We went to college. I took business administration, and he picked accounting. He has always been quite adept with numbers. After college, he worked as a junior accountant for a cosmetic manufacturing company, while I worked in the administrative section of a supply chain organization. 3 months later, we were married. Steve was an only kid, so we stayed with my in-laws. Steve suggested that we save the money on buying or renting a house for our children. A year later, Stephanie was born. She was named after her father. Steve was the happiest guy in the world, and I knew right once that my daughter would be a daddy's girl. After we brought our infant home, he spent the most of his time in her room, standing near her cot and either humming or singing. Was he neglecting you? Lincoln inquired. Oh, no. He was a wonderful gentleman. Nancy began crying again. Be courageous, Mrs. Westford. We had the assistance of my in-laws to handle things. Steve's mother was a housewife. She would care for her when I returned to work. Steve has always addressed his parents by their first names. John and Mary, Steph, a true dad's girl, would address them by their first names when she was younger. What about your parents? It was Grandpa and Grandma. It appeared that life was going well. No mortgage. Your daughter was being cared after by her grandmother. Sorry, Mary, a kind spouse and devoted father. So what went wrong? Lincoln frowned while living with his in-laws. It felt as if I was being watched all the time. If I arrived home late from work, even just 10 minutes. Mary would inquire whether there was heavy traffic on the road. When I went shopping alone, she would inquire where I was going and what time I would return. When I wore a tight dress to work, she would make a comment. It felt like I was in a prison. Maybe she was too protective. How about Steve? Steve is the kindest person I've ever met. He would never say anything hurtful to me. One day he told me that we were in love before we were born. That's my Steve. Did you ever inform him about being watched by his mother? No, never. He was so close to his parents that I didn't want to bring it up. I knew he'd look for a house right away and move out with his family. I did not want this to happen. Nancy sobbed. He pledged to protect, care for, and shower me with affection. He has always treated me as a queen. Would you like to take a quick break, Nancy? Lincoln asked in a motherly tone. No. Let us conclude with this. I need to go home, as you wish. Lincoln inhaled deeply. What was the tipping point? After Steph turned 8, John wanted to retire early. He purchased a 3-room apartment in Naples, Florida, near the beach, and left the house to us. We simply had to pay for electricity, repairs, and property taxes. When John and Mary moved out, they still owned the house. It was as if I had reclaimed my freedom, but it was sad for Steve and Stephanie. When I got home late in the afternoon after work, I started wearing whatever I wanted. I didn't need to answer to anyone. My colleagues, who had usually invited me to their girls' night out but I had always declined, were surprised when I showed up alone. One Friday evening, they went to their customary tavern. Steve agreed to let you go out alone on these nights. Yes, indeed. He loved me so strongly that he never refused anything. He trusted me more than anyone else in our group. There were unmarried and married women. Some were loyal to their lovers or wives, while others were not. Whatever transpired on those nights out remained a secret. I had always drawn a distinction between myself and the men we encountered. Then, one Friday evening, I met a married man. We talked, we drank, we performed on the dance floor. He drew me firmly against him, and I could feel a bulge in his pants. It was exciting. After a few dances, he led me outside to his car, which was parked in the distant corner. He opened the back door and pushed me over the seat. After that, he got into his vehicle and drove away. I threw the rubber into a trash can and walked to the bar. Why did you cheat on your husband? Because I could. It was exciting, yet it was only played that night. When I arrived home, Steve was already asleep. I watched him and cried. I promised myself I wouldn't do it again. Then I realized that I had already made one at the altar of the house of God in front of friends and family. I couldn't sleep that night. I despised myself. The next day, I couldn't look him in the eyes. He asked whether there was something wrong. I lied. I told him I wasn't feeling well. I felt filled with remorse. That night, as a form of atonement to forgive myself, I nearly killed him with play. When did you next cheat on your husband? I stopped attending the monthly girls' night out. I always found an excuse to decline my colleagues' invitations. Around 6 months later, while they begged me to be present that evening. My colleague Carmela, the doyen of our department, intervened on my behalf and informed them that I was not interested and that they should leave me alone. Later, over lunch, she came to sit next to me. She was in her mid-50s and had already become a grandmother. She has never gone out with her colleagues. She inquired as to why I had quit going out with the girls. I said that I did not want to cheat on my husband while alone with other men. The lust was there, and I could have crossed the line at any point. She looked me in the eyes and asked whether I'd done it already. At that point, I couldn't lie to her. I told her the truth, and how much it hurt as a woman. I hope she gave you some helpful advice. Lincoln cut in. Nancy looked down and shook her head. She grasped my hand and began telling me about her life. She got married young. After menopause, she already had 2 daughters who were married with children. She began to feel elderly, which she could not accept. She started wearing tight dresses, applying tons of makeup, and arranging her hair like the younger generation. Her husband was okay with it. Still, she was dissatisfied. One Saturday after shopping, she went to a coffee shop and sat next to a young man approximately her age. When she finished her coffee, he asked her if she wanted to have some fun. She grinned, surprised, and asked if he knew of a discreet location. The young man joined her in her car and showed her an underground parking garage with no cameras. He ducked her twice in the rear seat. They began meeting regularly, and after 6 months, he brought a buddy, followed by another. So far, she has only taken partners in their early 20s. Her husband didn't notice till now. She is quite careful. I inquired whether she had any regrets. She had. She told me that she only loved her spouse and her young lovers. It was all play. She also stated that it did not bother her if her husband was unaware. My God, don't tell me you were affected by her. Unfortunately, the answer is yes. My girls' night out began again, but this time I was alone. Steve assumed I was with my coworkers. I opted to avoid married males because they were clearly cheating on their wives and would keep everything private. You can't fathom how many of them are out there trying their luck at avoiding other ladies. Demand will exist as long as there is supply. Lincoln commented, "I always end the relationship after 7 to 8 months. Nancy dismissed Lincoln's sarcasm. I was concerned that a long-term relationship would jeopardize my married life while also exposing me to a variety of guys after only one partner. I would take a 2 to 3 month break. Then I'd search for another one. Where do you meet them?" As I already stated, these married men are ubiquitous. They can be found in almost every watering hole. We'll stay in motels on Saturdays. When I went shopping alone, I left Steve at home to care for Stephanie and the housework while I went out without the girls. Sometimes I'll take a long lunch at work, sometimes after work. We will have a quickie in the back seat of my car. You were quite busy. Were you never fatigued when you arrived home? How could you live a double life without regret? I grew used to it. One thing, though, I've never refused Steve anything. I've always refused to open my back door to my lovers. In my mind, only my spouse owned me. Furthermore, I requested that my partners wear a rubber during play. Even though I was on birth control, I didn't want to bring any diseases home. Update. Life was good then. Till I met Lou about 6 months ago. The biggest mistake of my life. Lincoln shakes her head. Tell me how it began with Mr. Cipher, Lucifer. One Saturday, I was in a supermarket, leaning down to get a bottle of juice from the bottom shelf, when I glanced around in horror. It was Lou. He apologized and said that he had tripped over something. There was no one in the aisle at that time. There was no one to corroborate whether the action was deliberate or not. He then walked away, smiling. While walking to my car in the parking lot, I couldn't stop thinking about that guy. When I was ready to get into my car, he appeared from nowhere and repeated his excuse. I told him it was an accident and everything was fine. He invited me for coffee, and I informed him that I was married, showing him my ring finger. He said he wasn't. He wrote his name and phone number on a piece of paper and gave it to me. He asked me to call him whenever I wanted to speak with a friend. You didn't toss the paper away, did you? No. The entire day and the remainder of the week. I was thinking of him. That Friday, I let myself fall into lust. I called him, and he was expecting my call. We decided to meet the next day at his apartment. He gave me the address. I've never met my partners in their homes for obvious reasons. It was exciting to play with someone in his own bed, even if I was breaking my own rule and conviction about single men. I decided to try it. We met on Saturday, and the first thing I told him was that he needed to wear protection, as this was not a one-time affair. Nancy shakes her head. We proceeded to meet in the same way I had with my past partners. After about 3 months, I sensed he was becoming more possessive. One evening on my girls' night out, he urged me to stay the night with him so that I might wake up in his arms. Did you get up the next morning? How could I? Then he wanted to meet more frequently, which I declined. One day, he handed me a powder and told me to mix it into Steve's drink. He would sleep soundly after dinner. He would then come to my house at night and tuck me into my bed with my husband lying next me. This was ridiculous, and I assured him that I would never do something like that. It was then that I made the decision to disassociate myself from him. I stopped meeting with him around lunch or after work hours. I came up with a variety of reasons. We met after 3 Saturdays. He was not satisfied. What have you done? Steve was my man. I belonged to him. I didn't see Lou for about a month. He kept phoning and messaging me. I would periodically respond to him, stating that I was busy and that he had wounded me so much. The last time, I was still healing. He apologized and sent flowers to my office. Then, last Saturday, I wanted to meet him one final time and tell him that our relationship was finished. Also, I knew that I had gone too far with my cheating, and it was time to stop. It would be my final tryst, and afterward, I would be the best wife a husband could have. Nancy looked away from Lincoln. At that point, she was thinking about hundreds of different things. As usual, we met at his house. Nancy continued. He grabbed my arm and forced me into the bed. I kicked him really hard. I immediately grabbed my cell phone, which was on the nightstand. I warned him that if he tried to asterisk me again, I would contact 911. He did not respond. I yelled at him, saying I didn't want to see him again. I hurriedly put on my dress and left his home. Has he tried to approach you since then? No. The entire week. He did not contact me until this morning. Nancy inhaled deeply and shook her head. After around 10 missed calls, I blocked his number. Then he dialed the house phone. I'm not sure how he acquired my home phone number. I've never handed it to him. Perhaps he removed it from your cell phone's contact list without your knowledge. Perhaps I was in the bathroom. Steve went to the liquor store to purchase some wine. Today he planned to surprise us with Coke, au vin, and tiramisu for dessert. Steph answered the phone, and Lou offered his full name and explained that he was a colleague at work who needed to discuss an important file. She told him I was busy and would call him back later when she briefed me about Lou. I asked my kid to go clean her room. I know she always plays loud music while doing so. I then walked to the basement and contacted him on my cell phone. Nancy paused and looked down at the floor. What exactly did he say? Lincoln asked after a moment. He asked me to come to his place right away, or he would inform Steve about my affair. I immediately responded, saying it was my goal to inform my spouse about my adultery. I assured him that Steve loved me so much that he could forgive me. We would go to therapy together, and I'd never look at another man again. Steve would be the only one to keep me until death do us part. Nancy sobbed and wiped her eyes. Then he said something that scared me. What was that? Lincoln frowned. He stated Steve loved wine and had outstanding taste. I froze on the spot. I was speechless. He went on to say that if he couldn't have me, nobody would. Then I heard 2 gunshots and people scream. I went into a panic. I yelled at him for what was happening, that I heard gunfire. What did he do? There was no reaction until I heard the car door close. He repeated the same thing, that if he couldn't have me, then no one could. I then heard a single gunshot. I went into a panic. I took my car and drove to the booze store. When I arrived, the cops had already placed the yellow crime scene tape around. Steve was dead in the parking lot with 2 wounds in his chest. Nancy broke into tears. Lucifer was discovered dead in his automobile near the crime scene with a hole in the back of his head. It appears he shot himself in the mouth. Lincoln held Nancy's hand. You have a daughter to care for. She looked in the mirror and nodded. Your folks are waiting in the front office. Come, I will lead you to them. Lincoln paused as he walked down the corridor. Nancy, Steve, as you mentioned, was an excellent husband and parent. He adored his family. He was a good cook. He handled the chores and maintained the yard and house. He gave you complete freedom. He was the perfect husband that any woman would want. Nonetheless, you cheated on him. This was a mistake, a fatal error. Lincoln turned and went away. Nancy hurried to her parents and hugged them. They all sobbed. You left Steph alone at home? Nancy asked. John and Mary came an hour earlier. Steph called them, and they boarded the next available flight. Let's go home. Both parents grasped Nancy's arms and led her out of the precinct. When they arrived home, some of Stephanie's friends were present. Nancy spotted John and Mary. They did not grin at her. I need to see Stephanie. Where is she? Nancy asked. She's in her room with a few friends. Mary responded. Steph walked down the stairs as her pal looked at her. Nancy realized she'd been crying for hours. John. Steph shouted, Get this boisterous air out of this house. She turned towards Nancy. You killed my father. No, Lo, Nancy shouted. Let me clarify. There's nothing to explain. It's all over the news, internet, and social media. Stephanie reacted angrily. Cheating wife's husband took his own life. They were all surprised by Steph's reaction. Her companions attempted to calm her down, but to no avail. Steph approached John and Mary. John, I do not want to see her anymore. Simply tell her to go away. Please, Stephanie, Nancy begged. This was a mistake. A horrible mistake. My father died unaware that his loving wife was a cheater and liar. My father was slain without understanding why. He was murdered without realizing that the person who drew the trigger was his wife's lover. He died without realizing he was a cool asterisk. Colt. It is a catastrophe, and we are all distraught. Grandpa attempted to calm down the situation. Let us begin by completing the necessary tasks. Then we address our difficulties. With this asterisk around. No way. Please, Steph, do not use such language towards your mother. Grandma said to let her talk. John yelled. Mary grabbed his arm and drew him towards her. Mary, today we lost our son. Asterisk. Steph's companions excused themselves and approached the door. Your daughter is a cheating asterisk, John added. You already know it. We know it. And the whole world found out after my only child was slain. Normally, a kid is responsible for burying his or her parents. Today, we have to bury our kid, John. My father will be buried in Naples. Everyone turned to face Stephanie. You still know a lot of people in this city, Steph explained. You still have some connections. Contact the appropriate person to get this done. Most importantly, I need to see a lawyer to draft all of my adoption paperwork. Please, Steph, do not do anything that you will regret later, Grandpa begged. Please, you cannot do this to me, Nancy cried. I cannot live in the same house as this cheater. I cannot breathe the same air. She is disgusting. I do not want to see her face anymore. Steph turned to face John. Please ask her to go away. We are also your grandparents. Grandmother wept. You are a part of our lives. Grandma, Grandpa, I love you with all of my heart. I admire you and will never forget what you have done for me. But your kid is raucous and I can't tolerate her. I am a Westford, and I belong to the Westwards. On Monday, you will take me to school. John, I'll need my transcript and other documentation for a school transfer. I definitely will. John drew Steph towards him and hugged her. You'll also have to sell this residence. Too many memories. Steph wiped her tears. Nancy, you can take whatever you want from this house. John spoke with authority. The remainder will be donated to Goodwill. Epilogue. Stephanie relocated to Naples, Florida. She never forgave Nancy. She spoke with Grandpa and Grandma only when they called. She visited Steve's grave once a week. John and Mary were now her parents. Nancy began visiting a shrink, but things worsened after a few months. She had to be interned in a mental institution. Her doctor has begged with the staff to simply meet her mother once and forgive her. This would help Nancy recuperate. Steph strongly refused. On the morning of Steph's 18th birthday, a nurse discovered Nancy's motionless body in her bed. Stephanie did not attend the funeral. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.